Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Play Sonic Advance 3. In the last part we finished off Twinkle Snow and then charged through pretty much all of Cybertrack here in the process. All we have left to do here is the special stage as well as the boss fight, so now we're going to be moving on to the final zone after that. As we walk over to it, worth noting, I've stated before that the latter few special stages in this game are pretty rough. But stages 6 and 7 specifically are easily the hardest, which of course makes sense because they're the latest. But it's actually for a reason that will really throw you off on a first go at these special stages. Namely, the little bonus rings you fly into to speed up the Tornado 2 and get a ring multiplier, they start moving in this stage. So when you first see one, that's not going to be where it actively lands. You got to lead your shot slightly to the left or right depending on which special ring it is. And that can really throw you off in a first attempt here. They also really start leaning into you jumping onto the bullet bill enemies to get the extra 5 rings here and again, which you don't need to do, but there's times where if it looks simple enough to do, you probably should do it, because again, we're at the point where the ring quotas are getting so high that any mistake you make along the way is more costly, so you should go for every ring you can. Off the top of my head, I think this is also the special stage I get the closest to failing in the LP, so even if you know what you're doing, yeah, it can be a bit of a toss-up at times. While I finish up this special stage, let's get back to talking about the game's development staff. Specifically, we're finishing up the special thanks section for Dimps here. The final 2 people listed we haven't talked about yet are Katsuya Kuramoto and Kenji Ayakawa. Katsuya Kuramoto started as a programmer for SNK, working on projects like the Super Spy in arcades, and a combo of home console releases for Fatal Fury 1 and 3, as well as the home console ports of Samurai Showdown 3 and 4. Once he joined Dimps, he was a programmer on Sonic Advance 1 and 2, Kirby and the Amazing Mirror. He was also the lead programmer outright on Sonic 4 Episode 1, and largely since the turn of the 2010s, he's been in some form of technical management or advisory, doing such on Dragon Ball Xenoverse 1 and 2, Saint Seiya Soldier Soul, and Dragon Ball The Breakers, just to name some more recent projects. Finally, wrapping up the Dimps crew, Kenji Ayakawa started with Dimps outright, being a planner for both the WonderSwan Color and Game Boy Advance versions of Digimon Battle Spirits 2. He was also a designer on Sonic 4 Episode 1, lead designer on Episode 2, and again a designer on Lost World, a project he was also the assistant producer on. Like many of the devs at Dimps we've mentioned, the past little bit he's been working on various Dragon Ball projects, namely he's the project manager on both Xenoverse 2 as well as Dragon Ball The Breakers. That's 6 Chaos Emeralds down, 1 to go, which means all that remains here in Cybertrack is the boss fight, which is far and away my least favorite boss fight in the game. And now you might hear me say that and think, okay, that's probably why I'm bringing cream in, so I can trivialize the boss fight with cheese, right? Not really. You see, as far as I can tell, as many times as I've played this game over the years, I think cheese specifically can't home in on this boss in specific. Unless I've just massively messed up the aiming every time, because the boss does sort of need to be in front of you, no matter what, even if they're above or below you. The boss here is the Egg Pinball, which will patrol the bottom of the screen left and right while its cannon rotates around the body left and right. Occasionally, it will fire out a blue projectile, which you need to jump into, turning it red. If the red projectile bounces either off of you or a wall into the boss, it takes damage. The more damage the boss takes, the higher its firing rate becomes, meaning there's more and more projectiles you can bounce into, but also more you can more easily take damage into. There are platforms on the far left and right, as you can see, but if you stand on these for longer than like a second, they fall away into the bottomless pit, so don't use those as anything besides ways to escape getting hit yourself. The rough thing about this boss is twofold. For one thing, sometimes the way projectiles bounce off of you or the walls just never quite lines up with Eggman, which is bad enough as it is, but your tag partner can also jump into them, potentially sending them flying even further away from the boss when they were on track to do damage. This is easily the worst boss in the game when it comes to your partner messing up your plans. Additionally, connected to that point, you can jump into a projectile again to adjust its angle in the case it's not potentially going to hit Eggman in general. But you only can do that so many times before the projectile just gets outright destroyed, which your partner is very liable to do. The tag system breaks this fight at times, it feels like, and that's on top of it already not feeling the best when it comes to being able to damage him in any consistent way. With the boss out of the way at least, I should at least note that in order to get the gold medal in this boss fight, you need to clear it within 2 minutes flat. In order to get the silver medal, do so within 2 minutes and 30 seconds. With that said, good luck doing that a lot of the time, because depending on when the projectiles decide to come out and what your partner decides to do, that fight can take a minute and 20 like we just had happen here. It can take you 6 minutes. It really just depends on your luck with what the tag partner wants to do and where Eggman aims. Do not like that fight at all. With that, we've now moved on to the final zone in the game, Chaos Angel. I'm bringing in Cream and Knuckles specifically just to showcase what this combo can really do. This zone is frankly huge. Each of the levels here is very long, upwards of 5 to 6 minutes on a first run no matter what, And there's a lot of routes here, as well as a lot of very small mechanics. With that said, the worthwhile note is that there's both indoor and outdoor sections to Chaos Angel. Whenever you're outdoors, it's pretty consistently just a giant bottomless pit below you, so you want to be careful here. It's actually why I brought Cream in, because I really recommend having a flyer around as your main character, just to alleviate the tension whenever you're potentially over said pits. Worth noting, in order to get the gold rank here in Act 1, you need to finish the stage within 5 minutes, and in order to get the silver, you need to finish it within 6. Like I said, long stages, especially Act 1 and 2. Act 3 is a little bit shorter. When it comes to mechanics here in Chaos Angel, there's going to be a few familiar ones. For instance, those little seesaws with spike balls on them come back from Route 99. We get these platforms back from Twinkle Snow and all that jazz. But there's also these little rotating platforms that stay in place until you stand on them. They work like the bolts from Metropolis Zone in Sonic 2. Namely, as you run on them, they'll move along a predetermined pathway until they reach the end of that pathway. I tend to ignore them more often than not, though, because, again, I usually play this zone with either Cream or Tails, so I'm usually just flying past them outright if I'm not using Tails' throw to just avoid however far they go up. There's also these very thin-looking rock platforms that we saw at the very start of the stage. They work like donut blocks from Mario, in that if you're on them for too long, they start crumbling, but they don't just fade away. They do actively fall down, and you do need to use that to your advantage if you want to use them to reach certain items across the stage without using the flying-type characters or Knuckles' climbing ability. There's these little pillars that you grab onto and they just get flung up into the sky or down to the ground. It really just throws you in the opposite direction you come from on them. Speaking of rocks, be careful near certain ceilings or on certain slopes in the stage, because there's little chutes in some of the ceilings that'll drop boulders that'll roll along those slopes. And sometimes they're there just to try and Indiana Jones you, sometimes they're there to just do what just happened to me and blindside you in case you're trying to go along a higher route like that. I'm a little split with Chaos Angel, I won't lie, because I do think Act 1 and 2 especially have some of the strongest level design in the game, and I'm willing to accept a little more, I'm not going to say bullshit, but a little more aggressive level design because it's meant to be the hardest level in the game. Genuinely, I think most of this zone's issues, with the exception of Act 3, could be fixed by just zooming out the camera a little bit or doing what I've talked about before, where they just make the camera move further to the right so you can react to things a little better, as the screen crunch is the real big issue here, I find. Off the top of my head, some other mechanics that are here, occasionally there's going to be a little sandfall similarly to the ones from Ocean Base that you need to jump up through. Although in my case, they usually just blockade me from flying as best as I can. There's the occasional platform you need to stand on that'll go along a rail that'll then fall off into a bottomless pit. I tend to avoid those just by flying more often than not, though. Later on, more so in Act 2 and 3, there are sections where, especially if you go towards a lower route, there'll be rooms that start closing in blocks on you to try and crush you to death. Think the intro stage of Mega Man X2, that's a good comparison for that. Those can be kind of threatening. We do need to enter one in order to get a Chow in Act 2, but I don't honestly find them to be that annoying at large. I'm really only not a fan of Chaos Angel Act 3 because it has very similar issues to Cybertrack Act 3, but in more egregious ways for reasons we'll see later on. Worth noting though, whenever I say something about that like a stage, it's usually because I have the experience with the level itself. On a first playthrough, this zone is frankly just going to suck. Same with Chaos Track. And it also really depends on your choices with the tag system, what character you bring in with what character, because there's some combos that'll just make stages like this tolerable, there's some that'll make them outright miserable, which is an interesting concept, as I've said before. I genuinely think the tag system could really work if they just gave it another shot to this extent, honestly, and push away from, instead of giving characters sometimes nerfs so that they fit the abilities of the character in question, do something with the secondary character to make them boost the character outright. Like, Cream and Tails in any combination, obviously. I've talked about that, I really don't like that one. I've showcased that they kind of just nerf either flyer in some form or manner. Say, instead of Tails giving Cream the balloons and making her unable to fly unless you use Tails' own action, maybe he actively gives her a jetpack, for instance, that makes her flight control closer to his but still have her current stamina consumption, so that way she's better at something she wasn't at before without necessarily nerfing what she's already good at. And you can even lean into the stamina by it being less her getting tired and more that the jetpack just has very limited fuel per use. Or Knuckles paired with Sonic, for instance. Knuckles loses his gliding, climbing, nullify why you might want to play as Knuckles in the game as it is. What if, instead, having Sonic as a tag partner made Knuckles charge up for a second in mid-air before a glide, but he just shoots straight forward super quickly, sort of like a Shine Spark from Metroid. Probably not too great from enemies, and maybe the pause could even give him a second to be hit, so you need to be smart about when you use it, but it'd be an interesting option that changes how he plays without necessarily nerfing him. Heck, maybe you could even have a thing where if you do that into a wall, a shockwave emanates in either direction from him for a little bit to maybe damage enemies outright that way. Plays into the power while makes the speed a bit more of an option. Could have been interesting. The nerfing of characters really is why I do not like the tag system here, because it just makes me not want to play as some characters. I like playing as Amy in Sonic Advance 1 and 2 a good bit, but I don't like playing as her in this game or having her as a tag partner as much because she makes other characters feel worse, for instance. There's a whole lot with the system that I think could have really shined if there was more polish put into it, but it ultimately makes some characters feel like an afterthought and just not fun to play as. And the sad thing is, in that regard, I would say maybe more time could have fixed that. And maybe in some regards, this shows that maybe they were having trouble figuring out what they wanted to do with this game's identity along the way. But Sonic Advance 3 had the longest development in the trilogy, I think, because Sonic Advance 1 took about a year to develop, I believe. Sonic Advance 2 came out almost exactly a year later in Japan from Sonic Advance 1. This game was about a year and a half after Sonic Advance 2. This was mid-04. Mind you, on the other side of that, from my knowledge, I believe Yuji Naka is the one who suggested the partner system as it is now. So maybe the partnership system came about later in development and they had to maybe retune a lot with the game as it was, and that's why the game took longer. There's a whole lot you can read into that. In either case, while I still have fun with Advance 3 on the whole, I'd say, I can definitely say when I play this game, I can feel that it has the most conflict about what it wants to be about, as I've said before. This game tries to have slower platforming sections while also having the high speeds of Advance 2, while never quite feeling like it's as good feeling as either of those games, because Advance 1 and 2 are very clear in what they feel like they're about when you play them. Sonic Advance 1 feels like it's trying to be a fourth Sonic classic game. Sonic Advance 2 is trying to be a breakneck speed game. This tries to be both, and it really just doesn't feel as good as either of the first two entries because of that. Either way, getting back to the actual footage, at this point we're in Act 2 of Chaos Angel. In order to get the gold medal in this stage, you need to finish it within 5 minutes and 15 seconds. Again, long stages. And in order to get the silver, you need to finish it within 6 minutes and 15 seconds. And if memory serves, on my first playthrough of this stage, between my deaths and getting lost, I took long enough in this stage to get the bronze, which, yeah, these levels get long. Worth noting, I believe this game still does have the 10-minute timer deal, where if you reach 10 minutes, you just automatically die, so watch out for that. Not for nothing, due to that, Sonic Advance 3 is probably one of the games in the franchise where the timer poses the biggest threat due to that. Not for nothing, though, I say that the timer doesn't really pose much of a threat to me nowadays in most Sonic games. There was at least one zone per game it posed a threat to me as a kid. Like, obviously, Labyrinth Zone in Sonic 1, Metropolis Zone in Sonic 2, rather. Not for nothing, also Mystic Cave on my first playthrough, probably. Probably Launch Base in Sonic 3 alongside definitely Sandopolis, but more so just for Act 2. Act 1's long, but Act 2 really is just absurdly long for the rest of Sonic 3's standards. Also, I really like Chaos Angel's theme song, by the way. It's a little bit atypically, like, atmospheric compared to a lot of the rest of the game, or even a lot of Sonic music to begin with. But the tone here is just very heavy in a way I find enjoyable. Feels more like it would be a level theme towards the end of one of the 3D adventures, more so than one of the cutesy 2D platformers at this point in the franchise's history, at least. But now I need to talk about something. Remember how earlier in the LP I mentioned that Alex_GER's maps on GameFAQs are largely pretty solid if you're trying to find all the chow or maybe where the special keys are in a given world nowadays in case you want to use a map to help you out? But I mentioned there's exactly one chow that's not on the maps for some reason. That's the next chow. Specifically, we need to actively break from going on the higher path here and go all the way to the bottom of this section of the level. There's going to be a little room near some spikes that has, I think, a shield in it as well. The final chow for this level is actively in that room. This is another one of those stages that actively has 4 chow in it as opposed to the usual 2 or 3. And I'm someone who will also check things like Sonic Retro for maps here and again, so when I was doing the research for the LP, just to remind myself, I was looking over there too. The same person, as far as I can tell, uploaded the same maps there, so that same chow is missing also on Sonic Retro, at least at this exact moment. Oopsie. Also, worth noting, it's not super important outside of the aesthetics of it, especially when it comes to the aesthetics of the endgame, but Chaos Angel is actually part of Angel Island. I imagine it's the only part of Angel Island we actually explore in the game, though, given the whole world split into several chunks deal that happens in the intro cutscene and instruction manual. It'd be funny if they were also other parts of Angel Island that just happen to be near other chunks of the world, but I imagine that's not the case. Unless, for some reason, Knuckles let some form of human society build a highway onto Angel Island, which I imagine he'd resist at every single turn, knowing him. Now, if there is one thing that comes across pretty clearly in Chaos Angel, though, with the tag system as well, it's that there are times where they place a speed booster very intentionally that really helps specifically speed-based character combos, so when the speed icon's in the top left, because them having access to that boost mode means they'll have a much more comfortable time clearing certain steep inclines or the times where you need to run up walls to begin with. Meanwhile, if you look carefully, like right here, even with this spring, Having this power combo, Cream just barely has enough momentum to get up to the top, and it definitely feels a little bit uncomfortable. That's also a case where I think the level design as well as the tag system are at odds, though, which is another one of those things that just doesn't feel too great in this game. With that, though, we're now moving on to Chaos Angel Act 3, which is one of my least favorite levels in the game, next to Cybertrack Act 3. The thing is with Act 3, it's sort of an auto-scroller, but not quite. Specifically, we're spending most of the stage on a couple of these platforms that are just going to auto-scroll you towards your next destination. Along the way, there's going to be enemies to dodge and a lot of spikes to get around. Having a flying-type character combo in some form, really useful for this. But that also means for a lot of the stage, especially if you use cream and cheese like I am right here, you're just sitting there occasionally hitting the B button, and it doesn't exactly feel the most engaging. I do like this level more now than I used to, but I don't exactly still like it that much. Specifically, I liked it less because I actually misunderstood something about this level when I was a very little kid. Namely, after you first get on this first platform, there's two specific points, I think, before the end of the level where you get to walk on solid ground again. But you get on another one of these platforms at the end of it. I used to rush through the solid ground segments because I thought it was the same platform when I was just catching up to it, but that is not the case. It is 3 distinct separate platforms. Whenever you get onto solid ground, though, watch out, though, because that is where they place the chow for this level, and not for nothing, especially the first one's pretty easy to overlook because it's very high up here in this corner. In fact, Cream just barely makes it up there, I think. Tails is technically better for this level as your focus character because of that, but I prefer the safety of having Knuckles and Cream here as my main focus because then I can just have Cheese Patrol around me just in case. Thankfully, this is mercifully the shortest level Chaos Angel has to offer. It's nowhere near as long as the first 2 acts. If this was a 6-minute long auto-scroller, I would probably never have come back to this game again after my first playthrough, honestly, because I would just loathe this level that much. In order to get the gold medal in this stage, you need to finish it within 3 minutes flat. And in a bit of a rarity, the silver medal actively isn't placed a minute after the gold medal here. It's actively 30 seconds. Getting the silver here requires finishing it within 3 minutes and 30 seconds. I imagine that's also due to the older scroller nature, meaning there's only so much time you can finish this stage within, so they figure the stricter leeway there is a little more reasonable, I suppose. Oh god. That's the sort of scary thing about this stage too, though. Because of the size of the platform you're on for most of it, if you get hit at any point that's not the exact left or right of the platform, there's a good chance your knockback will just send you careening off into the bottomless abyss below and just make you have to go through another minute of the stage on top of that. That's the other reason I really don't like this stage. And that's an issue that every character is going to have because you can't exactly fly after you get hit until you touch the solid ground again, so oopsie. At the very least, they did give this place the best song that Chaos Angel has to offer. I love this track so much. The energy is so good. Thankfully, the special keys in this specific act are also pretty much all placed along the platform route. So if you get all 10 chows on your first visit to a stage here, very good chance you're just going to find the special key here in Act 3 along the way. There are places, obviously, before where I just got that it could have been, which would be rough if it was all the way back at the start of the stage, but not for nothing. If you're having trouble finding the special key in Acts 1 and 2, just brave Act 3 again. There's a very good chance you'll just find it along the main platform pathway. Which I find neat is like a moment of contrast, I suppose is the word I should use there, because like you'd think the last level would probably have some of the most obnoxious special key placements that could potentially happen, but no, it's pretty straightforward compared to pretty much every other level in the game. But that's it. That is every normal level in the game completed. All we have left to do is the final special stage for the final Chaos Emerald, as well as this zone's boss, as well as the final boss. With that said, as you might be able to tell by the timestamp, we're not finishing this today. We're actively looking at both endings tomorrow, alongside anything else, really. So, Special Stage 7 is definitely still the hardest one, but I don't find it as annoying as Special Stage 6. If only because you know what to expect after what 5 and 6 throw at you. The worst part about this stage, honestly, is easily the ring quotas, because they just get ridiculous here. And of course, mistakes are costly, plus you got stuff like these jump combos they want you to do for some extra rings along the way. It's a rough stage to do on a first time run, and honestly, even afterwards, I find this to be a really rough stage to go back through. I forget exactly at what point they start doing this, but also at some point along the line, the mines themselves have started moving, which is pretty rough. But the thing that'll often, in my experience, mess me up the most if I'm not paying attention is the little missiles that the bullet bill-like enemies will fire out at you, because they're just small enough that I can very easily miss them if I'm focusing elsewhere across the screen, especially if I'm playing this on anything that's not an original Game Boy Advance or early model DS, because then there's just so much screen to look at, I can easily get lost in things. There is one part of this stage, though, I'm still not sure if you can actively do it the way it seems like they want you to be able to. Namely, there's going to be points coming up here where there's going to be like 4 of the bullet bill-like guys in a row. and then there's going to be a group of 6 rings behind them. I can't tell if there's actively a way to jump up along all 4 or 5 of the bullet bill enemies in a row to get upwards of like 20 rings, or if what they want you to do is bounce off 1 or 2 of the bullet bills at best, and then just grab the 6 rings behind them right here. I can never figure it out. That feels like that's too tight of a jump to be possible, but I guess it theoretically is if you bounce off of them off like the left side of the sprite. I don't know. That 260 ring quota, though, is quite the killer. Watch out for the blue rings here in this latter half because they do move, and if you're not careful, you're going to miss out on rings to the last second. And given how close I pulled this one here, yeah, that could have been bad. That's all 7 Chaos Emeralds. We are done with the special stages. Once we actively finish this animation, we're also going to get treated to a screen where a Chow actively gives us a cheat code of sorts. It's not really a cheat, though. What it does is that if you input the upcoming code on the main menu, you can access a special stage select to replay any of them in the case you really want to. Not that I ever would, but hey, it's there. But with that, I'm going to need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching, and in part 7, we're going to go finish off the game. See you guys then.